90. 90 is the number. 3 more than Sidney Crosby and 9 less than the great one, Wayne Gretzky. 90 is also the amount of Senate appointments that Trudeau has made out of a possible 105 inside the Canadian Senate. Merry Christmas Eve to all you wonderful folks, you beautiful people. We love to see you. Thank you for joining me on this amazing Merry Christmas Eve. Hope you were enjoying it. If you got the day off, hope you're enjoying it. If you didn't, I'm glad you're working hard for your family so you can enjoy Christmas Eve with them and enjoy opening presents with them tomorrow. But what we're going to be talking about today is the conversation that's been kind of operating in the background, but not really been the focus, because the focus has been on the election that's going to be coming up maybe in the spring, maybe in the summer, definitely in October. We'll see at what point. It's going to happen next year. We just don't know when at this point. Focus has been on the election. But we want to take some time to focus on the lasting impact of a Justin Trudeau prime ministership administration. Because appointing 90 senators of a potential 105 is gobsmackingly crazy. And we're going to look at exactly why this is an issue, break it down of how the Canadian Senate works and how it works with the House of Commons within our overall system, and what he has done over the past 9 years, but more specifically in the past 5 years, could lead us to some very troubling waters over the next 10 years here in Canada. So first off, let's take a look. What is the role of the Senate and how does it work? Well, it's a pretty simple process. They do kind of similar things and operate very similarly to how the House of Commons works. They review bills, they have committees, they discuss bills that come into the Senate, and they work in conjunction with the House of Commons. The way it operates is the Senate is considered the upper house, and House of Commons is considered the lower house. And it doesn't really mean a whole lot in terms of that wording, except for the fact the Senate has priority over specific proceedings and just this, that, the other. But overall, there's not really a whole lot of difference between the Senate and the House of Commons, aside from the House of Commons is an elected body, and the Senate is all by appointment by the Prime Minister. What they claim to do is they distribute the Senate seats evenly across the provinces here in Canada. So BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba all have a total of 6 senators representing them in the Senate. Ontario itself gets 24. Quebec itself gets 24. The Maritime provinces get 10. Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon get a beautiful 1. And Newfoundland and Labrador get 6. How that breaks down or how that makes sense is beyond me, but that is how this breaks down, at least in terms of representation by territory. Let's see how it breaks down with groups within the Senate as it comes to partisan lines. The standings kind of work like this. So you have the Independent Senators Group, which is 41, the Canadian Senators Group, which is made up of 18 people, the Progressive Senate Group is 14, the Non-Affiliated is 12, the Conservative Party of Canada has 12, and there's 8 vacancies currently, making up a total of 105. The Independent Senators Group was a group that was formed based on the advice and the work of Justin Trudeau. He campaigned in 2015 on the idea of we need to reform the Senate because the Liberal senators got caught up in a lot of craziness. Surprise, surprise, Canadian Liberals got caught up in a lot of corruption. And so he wanted to distance himself from it and said, you know what, we need to break down the partisanship within the Senate and we need to have an independent Senate group. So Independent Senate Group started in 2016. And then you had the Canadian Senators Group, which broke off from the Independent Senators Group in 2019, saying, they're not independent enough. We need to be more independent. And now you have that group, which is made of 18 people. So you have these 2 Senate groups that have formed under the Justin Trudeau regime that also take up a majority of the Senate seats. Then you have the Progressive Senate Group, which is like outright, those are the Liberal senators. And then you have the Conservative Party of Canada, which is very clear, those are the Conservative senators. And then you have the non-affiliated who don't want to have anything to do with any of the groups and they want to operate for themselves. So this is kind of like the weird breakdown of how our Senate operates. It's very interesting, which I guess is a conversation for another day. It's broken up by territories and broken up by allegiances. And the thing that's really frustrating about this is with all these groups being formed, how they're distributed across the provinces, is that this portion of our government are all unelected officials. You don't get a say in it. You don't get a say in it at all. Do you know what happens? Is that people submit their own names to a board which was created by Justin Trudeau. And that board takes these names, creates a short list, and submits it to Justin Trudeau. And from there, Trudeau makes a decision of who he's going to select and put forward to the Governor General to then appoint them to the Senate. That's how the system works. No election, no democratic processes. We're going to tell you who's going to be part of the Senate and who's going to essentially make the decisions on legislation that comes through the House of Commons or from the House of Commons to the Senate. And as I was saying, the makeup of these 2 houses are very different. So you have the House of Commons, which is created up of 338 MPs who are selected and voted on by the people, and the Senate, who is just appointed by the Prime Minister, recommended by the Prime Minister to the Governor General. The Governor General then appoints them to the Senate. They don't have any confidence votes, but they still operate very similarly to how the House of Commons works. They typically vote and look at different legislation. They have committees to hear from all sides before they commit to legislation. And bills can originate in the Senate, and they can originate in the House of Commons. But at some point, these bills do have to make it through the other house or the other chamber at some point to be able to be signed into law. But I'll show you why this is becoming a bit of a problem. Because as we were saying, when it comes to the Senate, this is the issue that we're having, is that they are unelected, no term limits, and they're lifetime appointments. Sorry, my bad. Not lifetime appointments. No, they get to do this until they're 75 years old. And then they have to drop out. Virtually a lifetime appointment. So when Trudeau is able to appoint 90 of 105 senators, you can get an idea that maybe, just maybe, there's going to be a liberal slant in the Senate. Maybe. But Josh, there's this independent senators group. And there's the Canadian Senators group, who is more independent than the Independent Senators group. And to that I say, yes, you're correct. A group that was made as the Independent Senators group, which you end up finding out is not so independent, as if you go to a lot of the people who are in this group, you end up finding out that they have some type of tie to the Liberal Party. Either they have been connected to the Liberal Party one way or the other, have donated to the Liberal Party. Just in the past year, of the 12 appointments Trudeau has made, 8 of them have been proven that they've donated to the Liberal Party on several occasions. And this is how it works. The base pay for a senator is $170,000 a year. Not going to take any additional money into that, but we'll just take it $170,000. Technically, it's $169,000 and change, but to round up, $170,000. On the low end, it costs Canadian taxpayers $18 million just in senator salaries to have them running. And that's the base pay. We're looking at more like closer to $30 million a year for senators just to be paid to do what they do. And it is interesting how the Senate started, because as we said, the group of senators are unelected and an undemocratic duplication of the House of Commons that was first introduced by the British Lords. And the reason why the British Lords brought it forward was because they didn't believe the people were smart enough to elect their representatives. So they instituted the Senate to make sure there was checks and balances from the homies up above. That gives you an idea of the origination of how our system works. And you just compare that to our neighbors south of the border who live in a constitutional republic. You know, their whole thing, for the people, by the people. Yeah, our Senate was appointed by the Lords to make sure that people don't get too out of whack. Keep those people in check. That was the origin story of why the Senate was introduced in the British system, which we then, being a part of the British monarchy, we imported here in Canada into our electoral system. So this is kind of where we're standing. We've understood where the Senate lands, how it operates, and the 90 senators that Trudeau has appointed. And to keep in mind, the way it works is, again, Trudeau just instituted this board. This is relatively new because he wanted to show that there's more transparency and more checks and balances for Senate appointments. But then the problem is his board was appointed by him, who all have a slant towards him. They take these names, they submit it to him, then he looks at these 5 names and, I'm going to pick this person, this person, submit to the Governor General. Governor General then appoints them to the Senate. That's how the process works now here in Canada. Fun fact, though, the whole idea of the recommendations of the Prime Minister submitting to the Governor General, there's only been one time in Canadian history where the Governor General's pushed back on the advice of the Prime Minister. Happened once, 1896, Charles Tupper. Only once in our history has the Governor General ever pushed back on the recommendation of the Prime Minister for someone for Senate. So virtually, this whole process is whoever Trudeau chooses gets to be part of the Senate. And so that's what we're seeing right now is Trudeau actively stacking the Senate with people who have a liberal lean, which will make things very interesting as we move forward into a potential Poilievre administration. Because if bills can originate in either the House of Commons or the Senate, but they actually have to go through the other to be able to get through to the law here in the country, it's going to create some very interesting legislative battles between the House of Commons, which is going to be completely dominated by the Conservatives with next to no opposition in the House, and then versus the Senate, who are unelected bureaucrats. Since Trudeau has done a bang-up job decimating his party, who are going to be, they might be third, might be fourth party status by the time of the next election. We'll see. The Bloc right now is being projected to be the official opposition. And we've talked about how much people who have that left-leaning bias and who are in Ottawa have a huge disdain for Pierre Poilievre. Do you not think that the Senate could potentially take it upon themselves to be the official opposition in this case? No matter what comes through to the Senate, they start voting it down. Could happen, could not happen. Maybe cooler heads will prevail and people will maintain their integrity. Maybe. But we've seen a lot of things for the first time over the past 9 years. And knowing that this is going to be the fingerprints that are going to be left by this Prime Minister, I don't put this out of the question that the Senate becomes the de facto official opposition, obviously quote unquote, because you can't actually do that, to this Conservative majority. I don't rule it out. I think it could happen, knowing how many have this left-wing bias within our Senate. I'm not saying all 90 appointments have the left-wing bias to Trudeau, but we've seen his history, we've seen what he's done, we've seen how he operates, we've seen how he tries to rig the system to make sure he maintains power? Do you not think he's been recommending people that have a bit of a lean towards him? There is stats, however, that this Senate has more often than not voted against the government's wishes. So there's some hope there to be had. That could potentially happen. But this goes back to something that happened over the summertime. If you remember back in the summertime where Poilievre was speaking to the police association, and he did a bit of a hint. He talked about criminal reform and talked about how we're not going to do concurrent sentences. We're going to implement consecutive sentences, so people can't serve their life sentences at the same time. So for example, someone committed murder, killed 5 people, got 5 life sentences in the process. They could serve all 5 of those life sentences at the same time. So it's actually, they're just going to serve 25 years. But in Poilievre's criminal reform, they're going to have to serve those in consecutive sentences. So instead of only serving 25 years for killing 5 people, you're now going to be serving 125 years for killing 5 people. And then he hinted at using the notwithstanding clause. I'll show you this piece from the National where they covered this specific situation. And we'll bring it back to what we've been talking about here.
Multiple murderers will stay in maximum security, and by the way, they will have consecutive, not concurrent sentences. Multiple murderers will only ever come out of jail in a box.
Monday, he suggested to a police conference he was ready to make many changes. And if those changes violate the Constitution,
we will make them constitutional using whatever tools the Constitution allows me to use to make them constitutional.
That tool is the notwithstanding clause, the override switch for all the other charter rights. Invoked by some provinces over the years, no federal government has ever used it.
It hasn't been used in 40 years, and to think that it would be used in this particular case to impose what a court has already deemed to be cruel and unusual punishment towards prisoners is really just, surprising, shocking.
Pierre Poilievre just proposed to override the fundamental freedoms and protections of Canadians. That's not right, and it's not responsible.
Poilievre argues democracy will act as a check.
Democratically accountable to the people, and they can then make the judgments themselves on whether they think my laws are constitutional.
He wouldn't say how often he wants to lean on that override switch.
How often are you willing to use the notwithstanding clause to change?
Instead of answering, Poilievre points to the Quebec City mosque shooter who killed 6 people. The Supreme Court ruled he couldn't face more than 1 life sentence. Poilievre would change that rule.
It'll be consecutive sentences, so it'll be 6 life sentences, and we're going to make sure that it is jail, not bail. It's going to be hard time for hard crime.
It's the courts that decided that, sir. So what does that say about your view of the courts?
It says that my view is that I will decide in my platform. Thank you.
He hints at potentially using the notwithstanding clause to make certain things happen when it comes to his criminal reform. Obviously, the Liberals at the time were freaking out that Poilievre even hinted at this. They were losing their minds. CBC was like, fire, fire. Trudeau's like, how dare you? This is so disgusting. Which was very rich coming from Justin. But the more we started looking into the Senate issues and the more Trudeau started stacking the Senate, I think Poilievre is seeing the writing on the wall of what could potentially happen here moving forward. With the Senate acting as a potential de facto opposition to anything coming out of the House of Commons, Poilievre's hands might be tied enough where he has to invoke the notwithstanding clause to get specific things passed. And it can make for some very interesting political moments here as we move in the next 4 years. So that's what I'm saying. As we talked about 90 Senate appointments from this Prime Minister, he's getting voted out this year. It'll be done. But the issue is his damage and things he's done is going to be felt for generations. Because Senate appointments can last up until they're 75 years old. Lifetime appointments virtually. And if these senators decide to become activists rather than go by the rule of law and choose to fight against Poilievre and his evil conservatives, as it's been so blatantly pointed out in our media, we could see some very interesting political wars happening in our highest offices in this country. And that's why, as people, and Poilievre pointed out here, let the people decide of if his moves are constitutional or not. Because if the Senate forces him to have to make these moves, we'll see if people are in support of it or not. So, as I said, elections coming this year. We don't know if it'll be the spring, it'll be the summer, or it'll be in October. But it'll be happening this year. Trudeau will be gone. It will be over. But the battle will be long from being done. That's why you got to stay locked in, stay focused, and we'll keep moving forward. Have yourself a Merry Christmas. Enjoy your Christmas Eve, and I'll see you tomorrow. I'm out.